In this video, we're going to talk about how to graph the equation negative 2x plus y equals 7 by plotting points. Now, when we say plotting points, we mean essentially creating a t-chart that includes different values that work. So, for example, I might draw a chart that looks like this, where it looks like a T, that's why it's called a t-chart. And the x coordinate goes on one side and the y coordinate goes on the other. Now, in order to figure out what goes into this t-chart, we have a couple of different choices. One of the ways that I do that is by actually plugging in 0 for x and solving for y, and vice versa, plugging in 0 for y and solving for x. Now, I'm going to start that by plugging in x equals 0. When I do that, I get negative 2 times 0 plus y equals 7. Now, the negative 2 times 0 is 0, so that goes away. And that just leaves me with y equals 7. So that means I have one point on my graph is 0, 7. Now, if I plug in y equals 0, I can do the same thing. I have negative 2x plus 0 equals 7. Now, the 0, again, it goes away. So this is really negative 2x equals 7. And I divide both sides by negative 2. I get x equals negative 7 halves, which is the same thing as negative 3.5. Now, I look at that and I say, well, that doesn't work out so well for me because that's a decimal or a fraction. And what you'll notice is that the homework system will not allow you to put in fraction points. That's because they're extremely difficult to graph with any sort of accuracy. So let's say this happens to you. Maybe you plugged in 0 for x and it worked to get a whole number for y, but it didn't work the other way around. That's fine. We can find an additional point. What we would do is we will take whatever the x value that we did have that worked, and we will add whatever the coefficient of y is to it. So in this case, the coefficient of y is 1. So I'm going to go start at my x is 0, and the next number I'm going to do is 0 plus 1 is 1. And that's what I'm going to plug in next. So I'm going to plug in x equals 1 to the equation and solve for y again. So I have negative 2 times 1 plus y equals 7. That's negative 2 plus y equals 7. I add the 2 over and I get that y equals 9. So x equals 1 gives me y equals 9. So I now have 2 points. You only ever need 2 points to plot a line. So our first point is 0, 7. So 0, 7. And our next point is 1, 9. Now you'll notice though that 1, 9 isn't on my graph. So what do I do with that? Well, if that happens to you where you've gone just too far, you can also count back a point. So like in this case, I counted forward 1, again, because 1 was the coefficient of y, but I could also count back 1. So instead, I could do x equals negative 1 in that case. So now I have negative 2 times negative 1 plus y equals 7. Negative 2 times negative 1 is 2 plus y equals 7. And then I subtract 2 on both sides to get that y equals 5. Now, normally what I would do is I would put the x's in order. So like this negative 1 would go above the 0 just because it becomes before 0, and then 5 here. So if you are working with something where you can erase to just put it above, that would be my recommendation. Here, I'm going to just scooch this out of the way so that it kind of fits up there. And then what you'll notice though is that this is now a point that's relatively easy to plot. This negative 1, 5. So I can go left 1 and up 5. So again, remember, if you ever find something that's a decimal or a fraction, this is how you find an additional point with a whole number. And if you ever have something that is not on your graph, so like 1, 9, I wasn't able to plot that because it was off my graph, then you can still go through and find a different point just by counting the other direction. The goal is still to be doing it from 2 points that are whole numbers. So again, this is one example of this, and this is how you'll do that to make sure that you have no fractions. And this is using the plotting points method. You may also rearrange this to be slope-intercept form, but you'll notice that sometimes that still leaves you with a fraction when you try and do that. So I do recommend when it's given to you in this format, probably try the plotting points method. Now, I did want to show you one other way to do the same problem where we focus in on the y's, okay? Because sometimes I find that that's helpful. So here, first of all, I know when I plugged in 0 to y, it didn't work, right, when I did that before. But I could try plugging in y equals 1 and see if that helps. So negative 2x plus 1 equals 7. I subtract 1 on both sides, and that gives me negative 2x equals 6. I divide by negative 2, and I get x equals negative 3. So I'm going over to my t-chart, right? And I now know that when y equals 1, x is equal to negative 3. So that is a valid point. And then I'm going to say, okay, so how do I find another y value that I can plug in? Well, just like before, if you know your x value, you can count the y coefficient away. Here, the coefficient of my x is negative 2. So I can count 2 away in either direction for my y. So for me, I think I'm going to count 2 up. So I'm going to try plugging in y equals 3. Okay, again, notice you could do 1 minus 2 to get negative 1, or 1 plus 2 to get 3. Okay, but this is telling you the next y value that should give you a whole number x. So we'll come over here and we'll say, okay, so I have negative 2x plus, and again, I'm replacing the y in this with 3, equals 7. I subtract the 3 over. 7 minus 3 is 4. I divide both sides by negative 2, and I get x equals negative 2. So negative 2 for the x goes with 3 for the y. So I can plot negative 3, positive 1, and I can plot negative 2, positive 3. And when I do that, I'm going to be able to connect those dots with a double-ended arrow. And again, keep in mind that when you're doing this, the line tool will already be built into the homework system. So you're not going to actually have to draw the line yourself. You're just going to move the points so that they go through, your line goes through those 2 points. But your final graph in this case would look like this, which matches how the graph we got the first time, just with different points. So remember, if you ever find an x that gives you a whole number y, or vice versa, you can count by the coefficient of the other number to help you find an additional point that's a whole number set. If you have fractions, you have to try to find other points. The homework system will not allow you to plot fraction points. I hope this helps kind of see the different ways you can use plotting points and graphing lines.